Hi, my name's Kate, and welcome to my March reading wrap-up. We are now a quarter of the way through 2025. How does that make you feel? That makes me feel like I'm on a runaway train to oblivion, but we're rocking, we're rolling, and we're reading. And I read 7 books this month. I read a lot of memoirs, so we're just gonna jump right into it and talk about these memoirs. The first thing I read in March was The Color of Water by James McBride. The subtitle is A Black Man's Tribute to His White Mother. And tribute is a really accurate word for what this is. It's a really compassionate and compelling memoir dedicated to his mother's experience and his own childhood and the complications of being mixed race and not having all the pieces of the puzzle that is your identity. The book goes back and forth between James McBride's perspective and his mother's. So in the author's perspective, it's more of a traditional memoir style where he goes through his childhood with his 12 siblings in New York City with his mother. And then on the other half of the coin is his mother's perspective, the transcripts of his interviews with her as he was asking really for the first time about who she was and where she had come from. Growing up, his mother was really secretive about her racial background, her religious background, where she was from, and really who she was. And it's really interesting to hear her sort of reveal in real time to her son about her Jewishness and her whiteness and her southernness. She was considered dead by her family when she married a black man. They even, in Judaism, the funeral tradition is sitting Shiva, and so they literally sat Shiva, had a funeral for her based on who she married. Despite all of this, or to spite all of this, she became a strong, passionate, independent wife and mother to 12 black children. There's this really compelling image to me of her sort of riding her bike down the street, and you have 12 black children just surrounding this white lady as they all run along together. From his description, it was quite the sight to see, but that was his family, and the sense of family in this is really strong and was really quite emotional. So whether you have like a troubled relationship with your mother or a wholesome one, there is something really emotional at its core, and you can learn something about the black experience, the Jewish experience, the mixed race experience. It's about poverty, it's about family, it's about motherhood, it's about personhood. I mean, really, because a mother's influence can extend over the landscape of an entire person's life, this book, as Anne Patchett said when she recommended it, that this book is a universal donor, that it's good for everyone, that anyone can read it and find something tremendous out of it. The next memoir I read is Me by Elton John. I've been reading a lot of music memoirs, a lot of rock memoirs, because I've been researching for this like separate creative writing project that I'm doing. So I will slow down with the rock memoirs after this, but this was a nice high to leave off on. I thought that this was great. In fact, recently, I uploaded a video recommending my top 10 favorite music memoirs and what makes a music memoir really great, and this book actually made it onto that list, even though I had just read it. Not to spoil the video, but one of my key aspects as to what makes a memoir great, especially a music memoir, is self-awareness, because sometimes people are just telling you what happened and not actually adding any emotional depth to that. But Elton John it's layers of emotional depth. For example, his experience with drugs and alcohol was not told as like some hilarious misadventure, but he was actually reflecting on it in terms of addiction and self-destruction, which was really refreshing when you read some of these memoirs and it seems like they're just humble bragging about how interesting and reckless their youth was. Overall, I think Elton John's voice lends really well to a memoir. It's really flamboyant and it's really descriptive and it's self-deprecating at times and fabulous at others, and you know your memoir is great when you can describe 20 outfits. That's when you know that you've lived a fabulous life if you are in your memoir describing in detail 20 Bob Mackie outfits. And despite his biopic coming out shortly before this book was released, I much prefer the book. I just think it's the perfect example of how you can have a fun yet retrospective, self-aware memoir, that you can have serious conversations about addiction and serious conversations about sequins, and that it can be compatible and fun and easy and fun to read. The next memoir I read in March was something called In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir unlike anything I've ever read before, and certainly unlike anything you've ever read. The author is talking about her experience in a same-sex abusive relationship. However, she characterizes this relationship almost as different media genres. She refers to a relationship as the dream house. So she talks about the dream house can sometimes be a romance novel, the dream house can sometimes be erotica, or choose your own adventure, or time travel, or cautionary tale, that her experience can be expressed in different media tropes and cliches, and that media tropes and cliches reflect our own world and how we see them. And I think that was like a really interesting way of expressing the situation, that it wasn't simply recounting the horrors of this experience, but taking a really academic lens made it seem educational and urgent. And by taking her experience and shaping them into familiar tropes, she's able to both expound on them philosophically and put the reader in her shoes, which I really appreciated. It was really unique, especially with her use of second person. But more than talking about her own relationship, she also takes a few chapters to talk about same-sex relationships in general and what she refers to as the public relations surrounding same-sex relationships, and this odd self-awareness that gay people have when they're struggling in a relationship, that it can oftentimes be really difficult to come out and share abusive experiences because of two reasons. One, you could be confirming the suspicions and justifying the hate of homophobes, and two, a lot of the times this abuse is mischaracterized, misunderstood, and completely swept under the rug. She goes through in many chapters talking about the historical examples of this and how this is a subject that's never spoken about. And because it's a subject that's never been spoken about, the book comes out as like really singular and one of a kind, and I've never read anything like this, both in how it was made and the subject matter. The prose itself is extremely great. The writing makes me deeply jealous. It's poetic, it's lyrical, it's efficient without being over the top, and I honestly was in awe reading it. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who enjoys good writing, and it's certainly going to be one of my favorites at the end of the year. Like, no question. The last memoir I read this month was something called Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This has been on like every best of list you've ever seen. I think it came out about 10 years ago, and it's targeted towards middle grade audiences, and it's told in prose. Like it's a book, but it comes off as one long poem. And it is about the author's experience as a black girl during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I went into this with really high expectations. Unfortunately, my expectations weren't met. I wouldn't consider this like a bad book by any means. I just have two theories as to why it didn't hit as well as I thought it would. And that's one, because it's targeted to like 8 to 12-year-olds, that maybe it just wasn't giving me enough. It felt a little too simple, a little too slice of life. My second theory is that I just didn't like the way it was told in prose. I don't think I've read anything like this before where it's told completely in prose, so maybe I would like a different execution of it. I just felt that poetry expresses this kind of profoundness that is not always applicable for every aspect of a memoir. That when she's talking about something kind of, honestly, and I'll say it, kind of boring, and she phrases it like a poem, it just comes off like a bad, boring poem. Whereas if she had written about it in a traditional prose sense, I may have gotten something more out of it. I just was not moved by the poetry at all. And again, that could be because it's targeted towards younger audiences. So once again, I don't think this is a bad book. I just don't think it's for me. I would 10 times out of 10 buy it for a child in this age group. I think it's a nice, soft entry point into teaching them about the civil rights movement and racism in the 20th century and justice and segregation and things like that. But for me, it was just like a little bit under what I'm currently looking for. Okay, now let's talk about some novels. I've always been kind of wary of the fantasy genre. I'm really jealous of everybody who likes fantasy. They seem to be having a great time. They have lots of books to be reading and they're always catered to. And I think I've been lying to myself that I hate fantasy, but when I look back at my childhood, I was reading a lot of speculative fiction. My world was full of sci-fi and fantasy, and I've just slowly been moving away from that. But in the spirit of embracing all versions of myself, I'm trying to find a route back to fantasy. I tried Lord of the Rings. I didn't like it, I'm sorry. And I tried Terry Pratchett, and I didn't like it, I'm sorry. So I've decided to move away from like classics of the genre and go into more recently published works. So I decided to pick up The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I recently read R.F. Kuang's Yellowface, which is more of like a literary thriller, and I was blown away by it. I thought it was terrific. And she originally started her career with this trilogy of fantasies sort of inspired by medieval Chinese mythology and military history. Think like Mulan meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, kind of. And I am so pleased to have read this. I thought it was really great, and it brought out this excitement in me that I hadn't felt since like a teenager reading trilogies. It's not really at all like Hunger Games or Divergent or anything, but it is a bunch of young people thrown together, and that spirit of community and a bunch of people who are a little rough around the edges, and you have your stereotypes and you have the people that break stereotypes. The first third of this book takes place in an academy. It has that kind of familiar, almost Hogwarts kind of feel to it. And that was my like favorite aspect of the book, was the first third. I love like medium stakes. Saving the world, you kind of lose me a little bit, but like learning how to fight and the history of the kingdom and trying to find a mentor, eating it up. I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that there's a war in a book called The Poppy War. So the middle third of the book is sort of preparing for this war, sort of the beginning stages of it. And this is where it lost me a little bit. The tempo died down. It really picked up in the last third, where it really talks about like the unflinching horrors of war. I think she took a lot of inspiration from the Rape of Nanking in Chinese history, because you can't really talk about China without talking about Japanese imperialism. And let me show you the map that's included in this book. Right, so you see it, right? Like, this is clearly China, and that's clearly Japan. So you can tell that there's some real life history and implications added to the book, which I really found fascinating, as well as looping in these classic fantasy elements. Overall, I enjoyed how the stakes were being raised over time. She did so much in this book. I think any other author would have split this book into at least 3 different books, but the way that she just like was constantly changing the stakes and where we were and what was going on, I thought that was really genius and sort of kept me interested, kept me engaged. There was always something happening, and I'm actually really excited to continue with the trilogy, and I've already bought the second book. So maybe R.F. Kuang will be the one to bring me back to fantasy, and maybe I've sort of found I'm moving in the right direction of what I'm looking for in the genre. My reread of the month, because I'm trying to reread at least one thing a month, was Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This was my second favorite book that I read last year. In fact, I bullied my mom into buying this book at a bookstore and was bullying her ever since. Have you started Great Circle? Please start Great Circle. So we decided to read it together, side by side. And luckily it was a real success. She loved it and I found the reread very valuable. This is about a 20th century aviatrix, I think Bessie Coleman Amelia Earhart, and her struggle to fly. And then that story is mirrored by the present day experience of the woman who will eventually play the aviatrix in a movie, decades and decades after her death. This is about gender, it's about sexuality, it's about adventure and womanhood and family and legacy and airplanes. If you liked Amelia Earhart as a girl, you have to read this. In fact, if you like any female hero, you'd have to read this, because as we all know, history in general, but especially the history of women, can often be like a game of telephone, where it just gets distorted and defanged over time and the women remain enigmatic or oversimplified rather than the people that they were. So you can sort of see that in real time with the perspectives going back and forth. However, the historical fiction elements of this, which is the majority of the book, were really great and really fascinating. And for me, the new gold standard of what a female-led, well-researched, hard-hitting, emotionally cathartic historical fiction should be. Like, this is what Kristin Hannah thinks that she's doing, but she's not. Not to like take any opportunity to throw Kristin Hannah under the bus. It's just that her historical fiction is very mommy book club beach read, you know, read it once, forget about it. Whereas this is something that will stay with you for a long time. And it has this great sense of adventure that is really addictive and really fun to read. Every character is amazing. Even if they're all on page for 10 pages, the author really puts everything she has into them and makes them complex and fleshed out. The prose is brilliant. The way she can form a sentence also makes me deeply jealous. And it still remains like one of my favorites of last year and one of my favorites of all time. And if anyone can tell me more books like this one, that would be greatly appreciated. Lastly, I want to talk about a short story collection by Flannery O'Connor, Everything That Rises Must Converge. O'Connor is known for her bleak Southern Gothic style, these sort of unflinching, realistic, raw portrayals of like the 1950s South and racism, ableism, sexism, integration in general. And the title of this book refers to that as the times change and people encounter each other, that we all must eventually become one. O'Connor's writing is something I really connect to. She was chronically ill, and that anguish over her chronic illness really informs a lot of the anguish in her writing, which I really connect with, like also as a chronically ill person. And that also growing up Catholic, and she was very Catholic, that we have sort of the same points of reference. These stories are mostly about the idea of cohabitation, when the vulnerable and the invulnerable collide in society, either voluntarily or involuntarily. For instance, a racist old woman has to deal with the integrated public transportation system. A man who volunteers at a youth reformatory is convinced that he can change the life of this angry disabled child. I found most of these stories to be really chilling and thought-provoking, but like any short story collection, not every one of them hits. So there's about 25% of them that I didn't connect to. Because the style is so bleak and cold, it can sometimes make it difficult for you to connect to the story. And that did happen to me a couple of times. So a few points, I mean, we're not doing a point system, but if I was, a few points reducted. I liked most of the novel. I think most of the collection, but not everything. However, Everything That Rises Must Converge is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a real great literary legacy to leave, and it's my third O'Connor I've read now, and I just can't get enough. Okay, so I think that's it. Those are the 7 books that I read in March. I had a great time, pretty productive reading month, and I'll see you next month for the April wrap-up. Okay, bye. Like and subscribe if you want to, but you don't have to, so okay, bye. Alright.